The perfect neighborhood, Catalina Foothills, one of the most exclusive zip codes in all of Arizona. We're talking about a maze of gated driveways, multi-million-dollar mansions, and spotless entryways that snake through wide, silent streets. It's the kind of place where neighbors recognize each other's cars, their maintenance workers, even their morning routines. A refuge where danger is almost imaginary. And when tragedy does dare to step inside, it paralyzes the entire nation. On the night of January 31st, bleeding into the early morning of February 1st, 2026, an 84-year-old woman was ripped from inside one of these fortresses. The only tangible trace she left behind, her own blood, coldly staining the front porch. Her name, Nancy Guthrie, mother of Savannah Guthrie, the well-known host of a morning show on NBC. Nearly 60 days later, federal agents are still knocking on doors in that opulent neighborhood. If this case hits you with the same urgency it's hitting thousands of people across the country, go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Every new revelation deserves to be analyzed with the seriousness this tragedy demands. A disturbing shift in the investigation, but this new wave of questioning hides a deeply unsettling twist. This time, the focus of their search is no longer Nancy's whereabouts. Their attention has shifted to a neighboring residence, a property that recently became unoccupied, and now it's the target of some very sharp, very pointed questions from law enforcement. They're not looking for vague details. They want surgically precise answers. We're talking about a home that, according to a former local police commander in an exclusive interview with Parade magazine, may have functioned as an authentic covert operations center. A headquarters, the perfect staging point, the ideal place to watch from the shadows and wait with lethal patience, timing every breath on that street before the fateful morning of February 1st. And here's the psychological piece that almost no one has fully clicked into place yet. Veteran investigative journalist Brian Anton from News Nation, who has breathed Tucson air longer than most of his colleagues assigned to this puzzle, confirmed through high-level sources that federal investigators are looking into a tenant who left the area right before Nancy vanished. His statements suggested law enforcement is tracking one specific neighbor, someone who emptied their house prior to the disappearance. And investigators are digging relentlessly into the dark corners of that unusual move. But then Dave Mack, investigative reporter for Crime Stories, took the microphone to weave a chillingly opposite narrative. He claimed those renters fled immediately after the kidnapping. Before or after? Those aren't just synonyms in criminology. The fact that federal intelligence is going door to door, demanding names under the Arizona sun, proves they understand the deadly weight of that timeline. Meet the tactical expert before we step inside that residence. Figuratively speaking, we need to understand who's guiding us. Bob Krygier is not an internet content creator or an amateur conspiracy theorist. This is a retired commander from the Pima County Sheriff's Tactical Special Forces team, the same jurisdiction where the victim lived. He spent his entire career leading high-risk raids across the exact geography that's now become a frozen crime scene. He reads Catalina Foothills through a military lens. He knows exactly what those avenues whisper when the clock hits 2 a.m. He understands the logistics required to pull off a stealth attack and vanish without a trace. And this isn't his first time weighing in on the mystery. In a previous interview for Parade, Krygier meticulously analyzed the masked intruder captured on a smart doorbell camera. He studied the thickness of the gloves, the way the weapon was carried, the density of the night. His diagnosis was clinical and devastating. This was an act conceived with absolute malice. A strike aimed directly at the jugular of that specific family. He went further. He said the level of premeditation distilled a dark, calculated, highly deliberate purpose. That doesn't make the perpetrator a criminal genius, but it proves they operated under a strict playbook. And they've stayed hidden ever since. A meticulous script, and absolute silence afterward. That was the behavioral profile he drew. Deliberate, focused, planned. From profiling to logistics, but in a new, explosive report from March 19th, Krygier shifted from profiling the criminal's mind to exposing their structural logistics. He's no longer just saying this predator followed instructions. He's pointing with cold precision to the exact nest where that atrocity was incubated. That's a truly massive difference when a tactical authority, backed by decades of deployments in the very territory stained by this crime, decides to speak openly with a national outlet. His warning: a property like that would have functioned as the perfect logistical trap for the attackers. This isn't clickbait. It's the eye of a veteran hunter recognizing latent tracks he's followed before. And the simple fact that Parade went to this commander right after the FBI's renewed fixation on that empty house reveals just how seriously this new lead is being processed inside the tightest law enforcement circles. They didn't call some analyst theorizing from a distant desk. They went to the source with the most lethal geographic instincts. And his diagnosis is clear. 7 weeks of agony, more than 7 long, heartbreaking weeks have passed. The initial media frenzy has started chasing more recent tragedies. The deafening noise of social media has gradually faded. And yet, the FBI continues knocking on doors, asking precise questions, retracing steps in a neighborhood that was already scrutinized to exhaustion. That kind of stubbornness hides a truth. Federal resources of this magnitude never maintain that level of constant pressure if they're chasing ghosts. If they're still there, it's because the ground is still hiding secrets. And that empty house is, without a doubt, an enigma that demands to be solved. Anyone who lived in Catalina Foothills and heard Brian Anton's report about federal interest in a nearby rental property would have instantly understood the chilling undertone. In a gated community where outsiders stand out, a rental home is, by definition, a disturbing anomaly. And an anomaly that just happened to go empty right around the time of a kidnapping? That's not a coincidence destined for a file drawer. That's a thread you pull. The Bureau is pulling it. And Bob Krygier is revealing exactly what dark abyss it leads to. The chilling command center theory lets walk through Krygier's statements step by step. He said investigators would look at a deserted property like that as a temporary lair or strategic staging point for the perpetrators. A command base. A deployment point. We're not talking about mere conjecture. This is the cold, calculating language of tactical operations. This is exactly how architects of complex crimes describe the physical infrastructure required to execute their sinister plans. A command center is where you position yourself, where you hide your tools, where you run reconnaissance without raising suspicion. Krygier also pointed out that living in a neighboring rental gives an intruder the perfect facade to roam those streets at any hour. Not an alibi, a facade. That psychological distinction is vital. An alibi tries to justify where you were after the horror. A facade legitimizes your presence in real time, before the tragedy unfolds. Meaning an individual could park on that avenue, circle the block, or watch from a car at midnight. And if a resident questioned them, they'd just say, "I'm staying next door." Tension gone. Nobody calls 911. Then Krygier added something even more technical and disturbing. He said operating from a vacant nearby property would allow someone to maintain an undetectable profile, making it easy to obsessively watch the neighborhood's pulse. The constant comings and goings. The intimate schedules of every resident, including Nancy's. He was describing pre-operational surveillance, a cornerstone of any professionalized kidnapping. A predator like this never just appears out of nowhere at night to improvise. First, they stalk. They memorize the environment's breathing. They design a mental map to strike when their target is most vulnerable, most isolated, and tragically predictable. And then he added the piece that is, without question, the most significant statement from an official expert since the Bureau released the security camera footage. Krygier told Parade that an abandoned home, hidden from curious, watchful neighbors, could function as a perfect nest for technological espionage equipment. If its dark occupants chose to do so, it would be extremely easy to camouflage inside the structure or around it without raising the slightest suspicion. Surveillance instruments, implanted in the shadows, in absolute silence. We're no longer talking about a simple peeping Tom behind binoculars. We're looking at the disturbing possibility of a complex physical and remote setup. A hidden lens, a network monitoring system, even perimeter motion detectors. Technology capable of watching Nancy's home nonstop without requiring the stalker to be physically present. A live feed accessible from miles away. A mechanism running silently while the house looked completely empty to any passerby. The feds know this nightmare is feasible. Bob Krygier himself acknowledges the undeniable viability of this tactic. The agent's systematic return to that same block, aggressively asking about that specific property, proves they're at least treating this terrifying hypothesis with serious attention. The other side of the coin, but let's examine the flip side, because rigorous scrutiny demands it. What if that property had nothing to do with the kidnapping? What if the tenants who packed up did so for perfectly ordinary reasons at the most unlucky, random moment possible? Even under that innocent lens, federal investigators have an absolute duty to formally rule it out. And ruling it out requires relentless questioning. It means gathering so much information about identities and occupancy timelines that the agency can state with mathematical certainty, this place did not harbor evil. The fact that they're still questioning instead of sealing this investigative lead shut reveals they're still far from that desired certainty. That detail alone is deeply unsettling. What 50 feet can buy you? Let's pause on the exact topography, because the abstract nature of this theory doesn't hit hard until you understand the terrifying advantages of the spatial design. Catalina Foothills sits on the lower slopes of the Santa Catalina Mountains, north of Tucson. Mansions hide well back from the pavement, tucked inside truly massive, solitary lots. The streets are silent, wide, and practically deserted after dark. On many stretches, there aren't even sidewalks. No shops to routinely attract outsiders. Zero buses. No foot traffic. There's simply no reason for a stranger to be wandering these blocks. That means in Catalina Foothills, any unfamiliar face stands out immediately, not because of hostility, but because the community is tight-knit. Neighbors memorize each other's cars. They identify every contractor and regular gardener. They recognize the dog walkers. But a rental property fractures that dynamic radically. By definition, a leased property brings a constant flow of strangers. Tenants come and go. Faces change. Nobody could memorize every face behind the window. And if someone uses that house not as a home, but to methodically watch for weeks, they get a nearly perfect facade just 50 feet away. From that distance, you can methodically track what time lights turn on and off, morning routines, and nightly rituals down to the minute which entrance they use most, front door or garage, exactly when the vehicle appears on the pavement, and when it doesn't, the brief window from when the garage door rises until it seals behind them. Which security cameras point at the street and which leave blind spots, whether they receive nighttime visitors or sleep alone under the shadows the final night. Minute by minute, the confirmed timeline of Nancy's last night reveals. January 31st, 5:32 p.m. She took an Uber to a family dinner. 9:48 p.m. dropped back at her house. 9:50 p.m. the gate closed. She was inside. February 1st, 1:47 a.m. her camera went dark. Just black. If a shadow had been watching from a neighboring house for weeks before that night, they'd know perfectly well that the window between 9:48 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. was their ideal operational window. Nearly 4 hours alone in the house. A dark neighborhood. No visitors. No nighttime company. And a camera that, if they'd done proper tactical reconnaissance, they already had a plan to neutralize. The masked man in the video arrived ready to hunt. Balaclava, gloves, jacket, long pants, and the unmistakable outline of a weapon holstered to his hip, plus a 25-liter mountaineering backpack. That clothing isn't impulsive. That's pure tactical gear. It's the raw preparation for a defined target on an exact night. The feds describe him as a male, medium build, 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches. Months later, no public identity, 0 arrests, no named suspect. What the experts agree on: former federal agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, one of the most solid, authoritative voices breaking down this chilling puzzle, concluded publicly that this individual stood in front of Nancy's door on January 11th, 3 weeks before the kidnapping, running a dress rehearsal. In their latest statement, the Guthrie family issued a very raw, specific plea. They begged the community to search their memories for January 11th and January 24th. Not vague dates. Those specific days. That family plea lines up millimeter perfect with Coffindaffer's public forensic analysis. 3 murky weeks of operational activity before the abduction. Military veteran Kurt Dabb told Parade he suspects 2 to 4 accomplices weaving this dark file. His reasoning is ice cold. The logistics for a strike of this magnitude exceed a lone wolf. Forensic expert and host Joseph Scott Morgan said whoever perpetrated this horror had been stalking her home for a while. They knew the secrets of that perimeter. They were measuring the environment's pulse before they pounced. Every renowned specialist dissecting this case under an operational lens reaches the exact same conclusion. There was extreme surveillance. Everything was coldly orchestrated, and operations of this scale absolutely require physical infrastructure, a lair to operate from, a refuge to hide between assaults. That empty neighboring property is the piece the feds are now investigating without quarter. The cybersecurity clue lets tie one last thread to this dark operational canvas. We know that on the same night Nancy vanished, multiple neighbors reported their security footage mysteriously erased. Investigators started asking residents about strange internet outages in the neighborhood during that exact disturbing time window. The doorbell camera recording was non-existent. Nancy's own front entry device went black at exactly 1:47 a.m. This is far from a simple accident or coincidence. This is chilling premeditation. Someone who watched the neighborhood for weeks would know exactly which device depended on which network. Someone with that level of access and patience had the knowledge to create those blind spots from 50 feet away, orchestrating everything from the shadows. The construction worker angle federal agents aren't just looking into the empty house. Their attention has also fixed intensely on local construction workers. And they're not asking superficially. Investigators are demanding data with a very methodical level of detail. They want identities, the exact names of every contractor and laborer who worked on any architectural project in that perimeter. Not company names, first and last names, every single individual. Currently, that exclusive hillside neighborhood has multiple homes in active construction. Journalists who've driven the area confirm these work sites, describing this factor as a fresh, genuine, and highly revealing lead for the case. Why does this matter? Because both construction workers and nearby renters share a fundamental tactical advantage: legitimate, suspicion-free daily access to a closed residential zone that would immediately expel any other outsider. A truck arriving at a job site at 7 a.m. never raises an eyebrow. A group of men eating lunch on the curb, or someone walking a property line. Those scenes are invisible to the common eye. All of it blends perfectly into everyday life. Construction crews are silent witnesses. They notice which homes get packages, who gets them, and exactly when. They memorize which neighbors leave for work at dawn and who sleeps in. They have the entrances mapped, including vulnerable doors hidden from public view. For a twisted mind looking for the perfect facade to spy on a home constantly without raising suspicion, a construction crew is the ideal smokescreen. When federal agents demand every name on that list, it's not a desperate fishing expedition. It's a net woven with extremely precise, calculated intentions. The timeline contradiction nobody's solved now lets enter the labyrinth of timeline contradictions. This is the key piece almost nobody in the media has articulated with proper rigor. 3 official voices have made public statements about exactly when the neighboring tenants packed their bags. And surprise, the versions clash. First source, a high-profile investigative reporter with the most solid informant network on this mystery. In a special broadcast on March 17th, he revealed a tenant left the area just before Nancy vanished. Detectives are digging deep into that suspicious move. The reporter's words, that neighbor packed up long before the fateful disappearance. Second source, investigative reporter Dave Mack. During a live broadcast, he revealed the tenants left right after Nancy vanished. The implications are inescapable. Those people stayed until the exact moment of the kidnapping and then suddenly disappeared. They were present during the abduction and vanished immediately. Third source, Laura, a local resident. She told reporters the mysterious occupants had moved out in the days close to the tragedy. Her conclusion, the move happened several days before the crime, based on one simple fact: the vehicle was no longer parked there. Same house, 3 different timelines. Why the contradiction matters. If the press is right and the tenants left before Nancy was ripped from her home, then we're looking at a property that went completely empty right during the tactical preparation phase. A house sitting dark and unoccupied somewhere between January 11th and February 1st. No residents to notice strange movements or report unusual vehicle traffic. That empty home becomes an invaluable logistical gift for someone needing to watch the street from the shadows. But if Dave Mack's report is the truth, if those renters packed immediately after the crime, then we're dragged into a completely different psychological and police territory. People fleeing their home without explanation after a high-profile kidnapping on their own street aren't just moving. They're executing a calculated extraction, not a move, a tactical escape. The kind of sudden, flawless flight you plan only when staying in a location has become a deadly trap. Everything suggests federal police are weighing both scenarios coldly. That's not the behavior of an agency closing investigative lines. It's the behavior of hounds on a loose thread. The neighbor who knew first enter Alden Muir. She's lived in the area for decades. In the first chaotic weeks of the case, she had multiple conversations with investigators. In fact, she herself brought up the mysterious empty house in the initial hours after the disappearance, without anyone asking. Her statement was blunt. The neighboring residents had vanished overnight. She demanded authorities search that property thoroughly. 6 weeks later, the feds are finally asking the exact questions this neighbor suggested from the beginning. But Muir added something even more chilling. She confessed to seeing a disturbing man lurking the area in the weeks before Nancy's tragedy. She never got a good look at his face. He kept his hat brim low to hide. He just didn't belong there. A dark presence. Appearing and disappearing without a trace, roaming the neighborhood about 2 weeks before the nightmare began. From her large bathroom window, where she used to watch the morning routine, her gaze crossed paths with this stranger. Always hidden under his hat, he walked hunched over. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't wearing workout clothes or hiking gear. He wore dark, out-of-place street clothes. That dissonant vision caused her deep unease. It broke all the neighborhood's normalcy. That's the disturbing portrait Alden Muir left in the file. An outsider moving like a ghost through an exclusive community where everyone fits perfectly. And if that individual was operating from the rented home, running a tactical rehearsal on January 11th just 50 feet from Nancy's door, it's very likely Muir saw him. The government's loud silence hears what remains unanswered, and this precision is the only border between serious investigation and cheap sensationalism. To date, there is no official confirmation that authorities have entered that ghost house for a formal search. What we do know, federal agents have been actively questioning neighbors, tracking every corner around that specific property. We also know Krygier's public statements put a disturbing theory on the table: the possible existence of hidden espionage equipment inside that building. When the press contacted the FBI's Phoenix office for answers about the abandoned property and the construction workers, all they got was a cold written response. The agency never comments on independent journalistic investigations. Plus, by ministerial rules, they stay silent on open cases. A total evasion, the government equivalent of slamming the door in your face. But in a mystery where authorities have voluntarily leaked neighbor security footage, confirmed the discovery of blood stains, admitted to genetic profiles at the scene, and classified the crime as a premeditated kidnapping, their calculated silence about this specific house becomes, ironically, a very clear message. Nobody is saying the property was searched and cleared. Nobody is saying they found no evidence of criminal interest inside. They're just giving nothing. And in the criminal world, that silence is a chess move. Why now? Why 6 weeks later? When Parade asked Krygier why this empty lot was only now becoming the target of rigorous scrutiny 6 weeks into the mystery, his answer was blunt. It's part of an ongoing dragnet. Detectives keep digging through every tip and anonymous lead that comes to their hands. Constant solid behavioral threads emerge. All it takes is one resident noticing a sound or a subtle shadow to awaken a memory previously filed as insignificant. Something suddenly clicked in someone's mind. That's the underlying message behind every tactical move executed during the last 2 weeks of this dark investigation. The sudden return of agents to the neighborhood, the surgical questioning about that empty house, the worker-by-worker combing of nearby construction sites, the sudden obsession with January 11th and 24th. There was a trigger. Someone revealed an unprecedented piece of the puzzle. The big question Bob Krygier was categorical. We're facing a highly calculating suspect. Someone who designed the trap, watched the target, executed everything with cold precision, and then vanished into the shadows. The government's mutism about their findings in that empty house reflects that same level of tactical, premeditated silence. They refuse to show their cards. But the outline of their questions draws a pretty disturbing silhouette. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. She's 84 years old. Her life depends on medication she needs daily. Her family has offered a $1 million reward for any clue revealing her whereabouts or unmasking those responsible. If you were in the Tucson area or near Catalina Foothills between January 11th and February 1st, 2026, and you noticed a vehicle that didn't fit, a stranger's face that raised suspicion, an unusual flicker of light in a window, or a car that appeared one day and vanished the next, the tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Or go directly to tips.fbi.gov. Somewhere, someone is hiding the truth. Everything points to authorities being convinced the perpetrator operated from a home chillingly close to Nancy Guthrie's front door. Those who followed this dark enigma from the beginning know this investigation doesn't stop until the truth sees light. The next chapter of this macabre story is already being written.